Hey, I am Rev Dan. We are Soul Evolution Collaborative, and this is Strip Down Sunday, where we attempt to unchurch your Sunday experience. So, welcome. We are thrilled to have this time with you to offer some inspiration, some spiritual upliftment, and hopefully a new take on life in a uniquely Soul Evolution Collaborative kind of way. So, we have Strip Down Sunday mornings to offer you a streamlined experience that hopefully fits your needs. We have this really strong desire to bring an updated message of inspiration to the world at a time when it seems like it needs it probably the most. The Soul Evolution Collaborative is dedicated to personal transformation and communal evolution. So, two really quick logistics before we jump in. One, everything you could want to know about this community, what we believe, and how to get involved can be found at soulevolutioncollaborative.org. So feel free to pull that up in another tab as we kind of get going here and poke around if you want, or pull one up and poke around later on. There is life-changing information available to you there. Second, it is communities with missions like ours that bring change to the world. And we are actively creating this new earth by bringing community together, by changing lives, by changing the paradigm in which we live in a way that really benefits everyone. If you are in any way able to help continue this mission, we gratefully welcome your support. Donations can be made at soulevolutioncollaborative.org through the donate button in the menu. So let's jump in. Today, so happy together. That is our topic. But before we get to that, I want you to imagine, if you feel comfortable to do so, close your eyes for a second and kind of just bring your attention inward. Imagine anyone who is watching this video right now, anyone who will ever watch this video. Imagine all of these people are in a group, are in a room together. You are in this room with them. We are all in a room together, listening to this message, sharing this experience. And so I just want you to take this moment and ask yourself, what is the one thing I don't want anyone else in this room to know right now? What is the one thing I don't want you to know right now? Yikes. All right. We'll come back to that in a minute. So kind of just set that aside, write it down if you want to. I'm not going to ask you to share it. It's just for you, but we will revisit that in a little bit. So if you want to write it down, go ahead. If you're going to remember it, that's totally fine. Just make a moment, a note of this thought. So happy together. We could, I thought, maybe jump right into the joy of community, oneness and play and all of those things. There is a very lighthearted energy to that, which sounds fun. But I think that wouldn't really get to the core of the idea of community that is looking to emerge in this moment in history. There is actually so much more to the idea of community that is really worth our time and attention. Now, a little side note, when we're talking about community here today in this moment, right now, we are talking about a true sense of community, one of authenticity, safety, belonging, a healthy, evolved community. Not one of these groups that, as society, we like to form to hide behind, to kind of mask our insecurities and fears, to have a place of fitting in but not real belonging. This false sense of security and common enemy, right? One that furthers the divide between those that we fit in with and everyone else who just gets othered, who we remove their humanity from by doing that, right? So we're not talking about one of those communities or groups or identities or whatever. We're really talking about a community that encourages vulnerability and authenticity, that provides a safe place to be seen and to see others, where there is mutual trust and accountability and really a love for all of humanity. So I thought we could take this brief dive into the importance, the inferences of the necessity of community. So I attended this retreat last weekend. It was glorious up in the Rockies. We were at like 9,000 feet in these snow-capped mountains. It was fantastic. So it was really nice to set aside that time to retreat, right? To kind of pull out of normal society, the everyday, and kind of press pause in a way. But what made this really really special this past weekend was that it just so happened, and we discussed this, it just so happened that everyone who attended, it was their first time in about 2+ years to be in a group setting again. And so the conversation that we had around that was everyone really took the time to make this decision. It was a very intentional decision that this event was going to be the place where we all re-emerged into, from this somewhat isolated place that we've all been through in the last 2 years or so, to re-emerge and come together in a group setting again. So there was this beautiful conscious intention that was set before we even all arrived. I mean, we all arrived with this idea, then talked about it, and it created this really safe space for us to be in this retreat together. And it created this intentionally soft and healing space as well. I think, in our hibernation over the last 2 years, we all dropped a lot of armor. The things that we've been taught to carry, the baggage we've picked up along the way, and even generational traumas and such of the past, things that have been passed on to us. So coming out of that space in this hibernation, where we have dropped all of this, the mechanisms that we had in place for being social were gone. The tools we had all learned, we have now unlearned. And so I will admit, I think a lot of those things were not healthy tools. So we have unlearned unhealthy tools, but re-emerging, we are finding, I certainly found last weekend, that it takes this very intentional and specific effort to be there. And because there was this recognition that we had discussion about this, just in opening sharing around the group and everything, so that at the retreat there was this great healing that occurred that really was only possible in this communal setting that we had created. It wasn't something that would have been possible alone or as individuals. It was something that really was only possible in community. And it was interesting because it made me think back on how many times throughout COVID had I caught myself just being completely done with COVID. I was just so over it. This needs to end. This needs to be done already. Which I'm sure is a common experience. And yet what I found over last weekend, especially, is just a thought that had crossed my mind before, but especially over last weekend, it became really clear that when we reach that point of understanding at a spiritual level what was really going on, what is really going on, what has been really going on over the last 2 years, I think we begin to see it from a different perspective. That COVID, whatever the effect was that caused us to do what we did, the universe encouraged us to go into this hibernation period over the last 2 years, which allowed this shedding and re-emerging and intentionally creating new ways. And that can really only be done when there is a grounded understanding and recognition of the process that has happened, of how the universe works, of the law of cause and effect, of our subconscious mind, of all of the things that go into making that process work, making the universe work in the brilliant ways that it does. And so, as much as I would never wish this experience ever again, and I would love for it to come to a very quick end, there is this process that has happened, this process of hibernation, of shedding, of re-emerging, and of intentionally creating new ways. And so this process continues, and then there is this healing, or at least the beginning of healing, that has happened. And really, what better example of science of mind principles, of universal principles, are there than this? As we look back, the more we collectively resisted, the stronger the message became. And the more that we clung to the ideas of what was, this idea of going back. How much have we heard about going back? We're going back in person. We're going back to this. We're going back to the office. We're going back to whatever it is we're going back to, right? There is really no going back. But this idea of clinging to what was, the more we did that, the more the universe really shoved in our faces what was necessary in order to move forward. What it was necessary to learn in order for us to shed what we needed to shed. And so with this, I think, came a lot of realizations. This growing collective realization that we are caught in this bizarre cycle of where productivity is compared to our self-worth, and it leads to this constant busyness. Your value is determined by how much you produce for society. And so the more you work, the harder you work, the more you get done, the more valuable you are. The busier you are, the less time you have for you and family and the thing, right? I mean, it's work, right? And it's kind of like this idea, like, let's work really, really hard for 50 years so we can retire and then have fun somewhere in the future for like 10 years. Or maybe maybe you're in the middle of that. It's still in the future. Maybe you've worked those 50 years or however many years it was, and maybe it's retiring now. And it's like, wow, why did that take 50 years to get to that place? But I think the greatest shock through all of this, the greatest realization might have been just how in our face it has become, just how reliant we are on each other, whether we want it to be or not. Some of us have been very grateful for this realization, feeling like it's a welcome step forward. I think some of us have been surprised by it and are learning kind of how to embrace this wider network of being. And yet some of us have been resistant to this idea of needing to rely on others, not wanting to be reliant on anyone, as if some way this exposes some weakness or, God forbid, even fear, right? And I think as the dust settles over the last 2 years, it becomes and is becoming more and more clear that as a society, we have a strong history of relying heavily on our own self-worth and have overvalued our desire to be self-sustaining. That perhaps we have lost sight of what community even is, what it looks like, and how important it really is to our wholeness. Because after all, community is what we are here talking about today. So this focus and overemphasis on individualism actually fosters a resistance to vulnerability and authenticity that are crucial to creating connection and real community. I'm going to say that again. The focus and overemphasis on individualism fosters a resistance to vulnerability and authenticity that are crucial to creating connection and real community. So even those of us whom this isn't individually true for, we have lived our whole lives in a society that constantly tells us this is true. The parameters in which we live, the container of the world of effects that we see around us says, you should be this, that, and the other thing so that you can be more, do more, see more, have more. And your value is, we're told, that your value is entirely connected to your productivity. And the results of that are totally up to you as an individual. totally up to you. You have to deal with all of it, figure all of it out. And this is not happy. This is pretending. This is not currently, this is not happy. We do not experience happiness in this paradigm. And it's challenging to break away from this. It's challenging to not buy into it. It's also challenging to not fall victim to it, right? We get in this place where once we realize it, the system is now the enemy. And if it's the enemy, we are victim to the system. So how do we not? And what's really interesting about this is that it's even hard within science of mind, even within this teaching, to not overemphasize the importance of the individual self. Yes, the self is absolutely important it's important in creating our own experience. It's important that we recognize that we can only change our thoughts and our experience, change our experience by changing our thoughts as an individual. I can't change someone else's thoughts. I can't directly change their experience. So it has been and continues to be important for each of us to know who we are, to use this teaching to learn about ourselves, to even heal the things that need to be healed in us, to recognize what needs to be recognized, learn what needs to be learned, all of those things. And yet, perhaps just because of where we were in history, it seems we kind of stop there, that we stop at trying to learn about ourselves. And what happens is, at least where we are in history now, it's as if we're trying to practice science of mind in a vacuum, which, right, like this idea that I can change my thoughts and it's only going to change this. It's kind of ignorant to think that I can create my experience and it won't have any impact on anything else around me. And this is true for all of us. This is true for everyone, whether we recognize ourselves as students of science of mind or not. Universal principle is principle. The universe works the way it works. The nature of this world is what it is. And so everyone, in a way, is using these laws, these universal laws, in one way or another to create their experience. And so they are then also creating the effect that happens around them that does impact the experience of those around them. And what is weird about this, I have found, is that in a way, it's almost like there is this emerging type of science of mind fundamentalism, right? Where it would be like comparing the writings of Ernest Holmes to what Ernest Holmes wrote about, right? And what he wrote about are universal principles, the nature of God, the nature of our relationship to God and the all that there is, right? Versus every word of Ernest Holmes in all of his texts. Is that the science of mind, or is the science of mind what he wrote about? And if you read, Ernest Holmes was writing books from the 20s, 30s, all the way through the 50s. And so if you read them, there is a noticeable difference in how he wrote throughout those decades, and yet what he wrote about was always the same. And so I clearly am suggesting that we look at what Ernest Holmes wrote about and not specifically what he wrote as if it were the new Bible. And one of the ways this shows up is in the importance of oneness and wholeness, right? In this overly individually emphasized practice, it's really easy to look at wholeness as in, we always say, oh, everything's whole, perfect, and complete. Well, it's whole, like it's all together. And so we want to have all of the things we like, our wholeness over here, and all of the negative things, the bad ideas, all of those things we don't like, we like to put those over here to the side and pretend this wholeness is our oneness. Oneness is our perfection. It's this. This is my idea of wholeness. Well, how do you have wholeness and oneness if you have this here and all of your other things over here? That is not wholeness. That is not oneness. And that is a major principle in any New Thought teaching, certainly in science of mind. And so we kind of necessarily have this evolving perspective teaching philosophy Life evolves, human conscious awareness evolves, the human soul evolves. The principles are the same. They always will be. How we teach them, how we practice them must change. Perhaps there were a time where it seemed like we could have our wholeness, all of the things that are good in our life, and call that oneness, while negating all of the things that don't fit that category. And yet, we must realize now, at least, that doesn't work. That no longer works, if it ever worked. Wholeness, the definition of wholeness, is incorporating all of the things we like and the things we don't like. All of that is wholeness. So in order to have oneness, we must have the completed whole, all of the parts that make up the whole. And so this is where it starts to get kind of interesting, where we really recognize the divine perfection in it all. It was necessary at whatever time in history that the individual became the focus of our attention. That was totally necessary at that time. And yet time has gone by, life continues, and our conscious spiritual awareness evolves. That which was our focus of importance before became less important in the grand scheme of life and our soul's collective evolution. So we learned what we needed to learn out of that. We experienced what was needing to be experienced, yet we persisted. We became attached. We almost waited too long, and it created pain, right? There was something new looking to be expressed, and yet we got so attached to what was, to the way life was, that we kind of started ignoring this. And don't ask me to put a date to this, because I could see us saying it was anywhere with any decade within the last hundreds of years. I mean, honestly, this has been, who knows? For some of us, maybe it was a decade ago, a year ago. For others, it was 50, and for others, it was 100 or 250 or more, right? This has been going on for a while. But there is this new thing that is yearning to express. And so, we got that experience, the exact experience to push us, whatever it was that was necessary, pushed us collectively into the next greatest version of ourselves. And so here we are. Community was yearning to express through us. This time it's a greater community, a healed community, this global community. Not out of necessity, as community might have been in the past, but this time out of desire, out of wholeness, out of seeing the divine in each other. And yet we collectively have resisted. Maybe not all of us as individuals, but collectively we have resisted this coming to being of this new idea of community. And the interesting thing about that is, from the individual perspective, community actually becomes a threat. The paradigm that we live in, even if we have worked for years to shed this belief as an individual and increase our inherent worth, our belief in our inherent worth, our true sense of self-worth, our identities have become so directly tied into the value that we provide to society that we are constantly struggling with the subconscious dissonance of battling over the compensation of our own self-worth as a collective. Essentially, if I can't make it on my own, then I am not valuable enough. Or the science of mind version of that, if I can't create the experience that I want all by myself, then I have failed. My consciousness isn't evolved enough, and I am not worthy of whatever that experience is. So when the world around us tells us we are not worthy or valuable enough, if we can't be enough or do enough, then we are constantly left trying to prove ourselves that we are valuable enough, worthy enough, lovable, pretty enough, skinny enough, strong enough, successful enough, fun enough, whatever enough. Now, we know here in this teaching that none of this is true. Even if the entire world believes it, it doesn't make it true. These ideologies are only true when we value the individual above the collective, above community. When we put ourselves in this paradigm of overly important individualism, then these things appear as if they are true. When we take that step back, when we take that larger view, we recognize in reality, we are actually wired for connection. There is this deep yearning within us for a place to belong. There's something within each one of us, that desire, even a need for a safe place to belong, where there is this deep and mutual trust, a place to show up authentically, where armor is not needed, where we can be vulnerable and share of ourselves, a place where we are seen and where we can see others, a place to serve and to be supported, where there is a clear and known purpose, where we share values and experiences, a place to experience this baseline of joy throughout life. And that is the power of this evolved community, this real community. That is the power of community, where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. In this article online on happiness.com, it says, belonging to a group or community, we can identify with, belonging to a group or community we can identify with helps us develop a stronger sense of personal and collective identity. It can also give a boost to our self-esteem and to our willingness to take on the world and make our dreams happen. But the importance of community goes way beyond that. And psychology tells us that there are 4 basic elements that are necessary for community: belonging, security, support, and purpose. And the effect of these things is joy. We experience, when we have these 4 things, we have a life baseline of joy. Joy is the baseline experience that we have in our life when we have these 4 things: belonging, security, support, and purpose. Ernest Holmes says, he's the guy who wrote about all the things we're talking about. The law with a capital L is a law of reflection. For life is a mirror, reflecting to us as conditions the images of our thinking. Whatever one thinks tends to take form and become a part of their experience. So we must be willing to look in the mirror, right? The mirror that life holds up for us, the mirror that is each other. Without life, without each other, we would not have anything to reflect back to us. And so when we believe our value is only tied to our productivity, that is what is shown back to us. And yet when we can start creating communities where we can drop all of that armor, like so many of us have started to do, at least, the mirror can reflect something different. If we have security, support, purpose, and belonging, if we have these things that make up community, we can have space. So we must be willing to be vulnerable enough with ourselves and then also with others to look at what is actually deeply ours. And so this retreat experience over the last weekend was an amazing experience of healing, of the healing power that's available to us when we are in that space. The uncovering, the shedding, the rejuvenative process that happens was only possible because of the intention set by that group of individuals when we came together. This intention to create a community, a safe place for us to do that. And so the idea of self-care came up. And we talk about self-care a lot in this movement. And we talk about it like it's something that happens independently. And in a lot of ways it has been. And yet that type of individualized self-care is really only necessary when we buy into the priorities of this fading paradigm where our time is bound to our perceived value. So when we shed these old priorities and place priority on the greater whole, it becomes a requirement to mind our well-being more than our productivity. The meaning and the look of self-care changes dramatically. Self-care becomes this thing we do in groups together. It becomes caring for each other. It becomes providing for the whole. It becomes holding conversations that address all of our needs. It becomes meeting those needs. it becomes play. Self-care is learning to play together. That is what rejuvenates us. We don't rejuvenate on our own. We rejuvenate in groups when we hold that as valuable. And perhaps the most important thing that came out of this retreat was this idea that community is where we learn to value our collective humanity again. It is where it is safe to shift our paradigm, to shed all those other ideas and step out in a new way when we are willing to be authentic and vulnerable. So shifting to this new paradigm takes willingness and an intention to make a shift towards the next greatest expression of humanity. So let's just take a moment, bring to mind, again, I'm not going to ask you to share it. Bring to mind your answer. What's the one thing I don't want anyone to know right now? And what is the feeling that comes along with that thought? Is it uncomfortable? Is there fear around sharing this idea? What would happen if somebody knew? And yet my question is, what would need to happen in order to feel safe enough, comfortable enough, brave enough to share that answer in a group? And maybe you don't have an answer right now, and that's totally fine. But we have to recognize our identity, even when we have spent years looking at this idea. This is not a new idea. It's just showing up in new ways. Even if this is not new to us, there is still that part. There is a little piece of us, because it exists in the collective subconscious, that says, I have to define myself by, I have to protect something about me. And so we have boundaries, we have lines of where we are willing to be vulnerable and not. So we must recognize that it is our job to take part in this ever evolving expression of life that is our human collective awareness, where healthy individuals engage in quality relationships, creating evolved community, which brings us an experience of joy. So we have to do our work as individuals. That is still important. And it's important then to engage in quality relationships. And these are new ideas. Healthy individuals, healthy psychologically, spiritually, physically, in all of the ways. And in a balanced sense of health, not in an extreme, right? In this new balanced way. Healthy individuals engaging in quality relationships, creating evolved communities, experiencing joy. So the question is, are you willing to set the intention to be part of that shift? We really have learned, I think, all that we can learn from placing importance only on the individual. And so we are witnessing a major growing divide in our world that is demonstrating not only what is left in our collective beliefs about each other, but chemicalizing more and more dissonance until it is so uncomfortable that we must do something different. Life is literally begging for us to make this shift into valuing the collective. Community is the next evolution of the greater yet to be. It is time to embrace being vulnerable and authentic by caring for one another. And in doing this, we get to be so much more of ourselves, to embrace a whole new expression of the all that there is, and to experience so much more joy than ever before.